Today it's myself and Carolyn Musselwhite, and we're just talking about writing activities that we can do with our folks with Angelman that really help them tell their stories and show off who they are. And so we're looking at Remnant books and personal experience stories. And it's interesting because so many of our moms have been really intimidated by the idea of Remnant books. And so I'm really hoping that by the end of this webinar, all of that kind of stuff will be a little bit demystified and won't seem so complex, and that everyone will understand how writing supports our kids' communication by really supporting them to be part of conversation and to just have kind of much richer social interaction, and just to learn some simple writing strategies that will just help you support your person with Angelman to tell their stories. We've already looked at it in a few previous webinars at writing as communication. There's a lot of ideas, there's a preconception amongst many of our families and teachers that first our folks with Angelman need to learn how to use their communication system, and then writing is a more sophisticated thing that we would do down the road with them. So I'm going to show you some examples of how writing is communication and how writing fosters communication and how writing really fosters social interaction. And I think that'll give you more of a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about writing. So this is one of our little girls with Angelman, and this is a book her family wrote called Things I Like. We may have shown this one in an October webinar when we looked at our first shared writing activities, but this is Sydney. And I like to ride in cars outside. I like to walk around the city. I like to take baths. I like to ride my tricycle. That's it. Just a very simple book. And you can see how looking through these with Sydney, you immediately start to think of comments that you make. You immediately start to think of additional questions you might ask. You immediately start to think about things you have in common with her. Whereas if you just simply met her in person and said, so tell me what you like to do, it could be much more stilted. Here's another example. This is Lily Grace, who went surfing, and this was her personal experience story that her parents wrote to talk about her surf day so she could share it with other people. I went to Malibu. I put on my wetsuit. I picked my surfboard. I surfed the big waves. I got a trophy. I was wiped out. So again, you can see by having this very simple story, this was simply a PowerPoint. The first one was, I believe, a Pictello story, which is just an app on the iPad. But just having this, if you had Lily Grace in front of you and you had this story in front of you, you immediately, from the photos, from the text, you just have the basis for our conversation. And that's really what we're talking about, is figuring out how to support our kids' social interaction, how to support their conversation by making sure they have these prompts, these tools that allow them to tell so many more stories. Because when we're trying to get them to use their communication systems, they're incredibly challenging to learn how to use. You know, when you have to go word by word constructing a message using visual symbols, it's exhausting. It needs to be worth it. And what tends to make it worth it is when we can put our kids' best stories in front of their hands, so they don't have to go word by word telling you about surfing, but they can instead be thinking about what it is that they want to add to their surfing story. So personal experience stories are just those things we do where you tell a story about it often enough that it's worth having it scripted out. Just like when you go to tell any favorite story. If you've been sitting down over the holidays with family members, you already know. You have family members who have a script for all those stories that you always hear whenever you're around them. That's really what we're talking about with personal story experience stories. Those stories that to us are so worth telling that it's worth taking the time to write it all down so that it's extremely easy to share, and we can instead just focus on the interaction, just like you have relatives who I bet over the holidays have been telling some of the same stories over and over again, and because the story is so familiar to that person, they actually can really focus on the storytelling. They can They can focus on the emphasis or the outrage or whatever that story was. Because they have that script, they don't really have to focus on reconstructing the memory in their own minds. And that's what we're working on for our kids, is giving them a support that makes their story so familiar that they can really just focus on the interaction. So we're looking at stories that help share our person's personality and their interests the way that those two stories are that I just showed you. We're looking for stories that really provide the basis for social interaction. So maybe it's a story that has a wow factor, like the fact that Lily Grace has gone surfing. I mean, how many 7-year-olds can say that they are surfers, right? So that's just the basis of a great conversation with someone. And stories that share what our folks like, what they enjoy doing, kind of what makes them tick as a unique person, so that they've really got a way to show that off. And we're looking for stories that, by being in the first person, by having the quality of these photos and the text, that it really fosters that sense of having a conversation with the person. Having just sat down and looked at Lily Grace's surf story, you can have a conversation with her rather than with her parents about her. And that's kind of the goal of all of these stories that we write for our kids, is what is it that needs to be in that story so that people can have that real conversation with them.
And I just wanted to add that we talk so much in these webinars about repetition with variation. Well, that comes with this. What we see sometimes is, as kids tell stories over and over, they're able to really focus on, for example, their facial expressions. That as they tell this story for the 5th time, then you see this new facial expression that's really appropriate for that story come in. Or you'll see gestures. I remember a little girl telling a story, and on the 3rd time she stomped her feet when she got to the really exciting part where she was where her mom was so upset about something, and she stomped her feet in imitation of her mom. And if she'd been trying to focus on constructing that story, she wouldn't have been able to do that. So just really fun being able to share their personalities in so many different ways. And also, we see some kids who, as they tell this story, for example, across time, as Lily Grace tells her surfing story, she's very likely to make a comment on her communication device and talk about her own story. So it's just a really fun kind of framework to have this rich, rich conversation.
Awesome. And I want to say that writing is really simple. It only feels complicated because we make it that complicated. But when it comes down to it, writing is just the words that we say written down. So when we run into people over the holidays, when our kids go back to school, on the first day of school, you know, as soon as their winter break or their holiday break ends, people are going to say to them, "Hey, did you have a good Christmas? What did you do? What did you get? What did you give? Where did you go?" And what so often happens with our kids is that people say these things to them, and the question floats up into the ether. Because unless they have a really easy way to quickly respond, the demands of the moment and the demands of having, I'm back at my first day of school, I've actually only got 2 or 3 minutes to get from the school bus to my classroom. Oh my gosh, I love the school secretary. She's asking me these questions. Where's my talker? Oh, my talker might actually be in my backpack, or maybe I'm wearing my talker, but by the time I can grab my talker and try to find any words, my moment's over because I'm actually being shuffled along to get to class. And so there's all these things that we already say that are really quick to say back, but they're actually really slow for our kids to be able to use a communication system to respond. But we can plan for them. We can plan that when our kids go back to school in a week or so, that people are going to have certain fairly predictable questions about what they did over their break. Whether they're leaving our house and they're going back to a group home, whether they're staying in our house and they're going to be going back out into the community, whatever their age, whatever they're going, we know that people ask the same things over and over. So if we actually write down the responses, and I hope you'll see some examples, it just makes it so much faster for them to respond. That personal experience story allows them to share a great deal of information quickly, so that they can focus more on how they're going to tell the story and what they're going to add to it. Carolyn and I covered a lot of the writing strategies in webinar number 11. So if you want more detail about how we model writing with our kids, how we get started on shared writing activities, do check out that webinar. There's going to be a little bit of repetition here in this one, but that's the webinar that will provide you more detail. So just know that writing is just communication made visual. And for our folks who are learning to use a communication system, visual communication is their primary language. When we reduce our speech as well to a visual, then we're just communicating with them using the same kind of language, using the same kind of strategies. And every time we go to make speech visual, it slows us down because speech is really quick when we simply say it, but it slows us down. If you have to write a message to someone rather than say it, you're going to be a lot slower as you do it. So therefore, whatever communication system you use, it's going to be slower than speech is for speaking people. However, there's a lot of huge advantages to it. We know that when we are writing things down, when we're taking the time to write a message down, because it's slower, the words don't come and go so fast, and we're actually providing a lot more processing time for our folks who need it. And some of our folks with Angelman, just for them to have strong receptive understanding, they need us to slow down. They need that extra processing time. They need more of a lag time between when someone says something and when they're expected to provide a response. And so whenever we reduce things to writing, we're providing that time. Some of our folks, especially our folks who are considered to also have autism as well as Angelman, the demands of joint attention can be really challenging, where they have to focus on a shared activity with another person and on the interaction with the other person. So you're doing something together and you have to focus both on the person and what you're doing together. And what I find is that when we've made these personal experience stories for our kids, what we've also done is we're drawing the other person's attention to the story rather than putting it so much on our person. And so we're just providing them a lot more space to come up with what they want to say. I know with my daughter Maggie, if you go up to her, go right up to her and say, "So, hey Maggie, how was Christmas?" She'll immediately turn and walk away, because that demand of having someone looking right at her, making eye contact, talking right to her is just such a high demand. She can't begin to provide a response. But if she has a book about what she's done and she can share it with someone else, and now the person has stopped and they're looking at the book rather than her, then there's a much greater chance that she's going to be able to provide a response. And every time we read what we wrote, then we have that extra repetition. So everything about writing with our kids is a really essential support to develop their communication. So why does it matter? It slows us down so that we're constructing a message a lot slower. It leaves a permanent record, which is important because we don't want our kids to always focus on how to say what they want to say. Sometimes we want them to just be able to focus on their message. For us, our speech is so automatic that we don't have to think about how to say something. We can just say it, but our kids have to do both at the same time. So they're always balancing the demands of how to say something along with what it is that they want to say. And if we can take these things that we know are really familiar, really predictable, and reduce them to writing, so that they don't have to focus on the how, then they can just focus on the message. We know that some folks, especially people who have autistic traits, may actually learn how to communicate through writing. So the process of teaching them writing, of modeling writing, is actually one of the ways that they may develop their own communication. And we know that the more we do with writing and the more we do with the symbol set called the alphabet, the more we're creating real autonomy in communication for our folks, because however many of our folks can learn writing with the alphabet are going to have the greatest autonomy, the greatest control over their communication.
And I also want to say in regard to the communicate through writing that Because we have slowed down that process, we actually have more time to go find more words on the communication device. So it's just writing can be such a fun way to explore the device with a parent and child, or a sibling and a student using AAC, or peers at school kind of looking around to find things that that child really likes on the device. And you're not in such a hurry because you don't have that communication pressure of, I got to find this word so we can keep talking. It's just so much takes the pressure off the speed, as Erin's mentioned before. And one more piece about writing with the alphabet is also that issue of other people getting our kids, that they can share so much richness through the alphabet. Even if they're just doing the first letter, that's going to help them with their reading. It's going to help them with perception, and it's going to help them just really feel excited that it just opens up the world in new ways that we haven't done when we only have words that we have supplied for them on their communication device. So it's really exciting when we see kids writing a letter or two representing a word that just was not on their device, and now maybe that's what we're going to add to their device so they can say it more quickly, but they just have that incredible opportunity.
And we know that writing all this stuff down helps our kids be more socially interactive. And when we meet with families of kids with Angelman and we ask kind of what is your child's or what is your student's greatest driving force, why do they want to communicate? Overwhelmingly, we hear that for most of our folks with Angelman, the need, the interest, in social interaction is their primary motivation. And so when we're thinking about writing with our kids, we're really thinking about social interaction. We're thinking about how to support it, because if we leave them at a point of they're having to learn communication only by a word-by-word basis using their communication system, if they're not getting really rich interaction out of it, then where's the motivation to keep learning? Where's the motivation to keep trying? So what these stories do is just create that motivation, create that interaction so that they can really experience the rewards of communication before they have the speed and the ability to kind of tell a whole story quickly in real time using the system. And I learned this really from a book that Musselwhite and Linda Burkhart wrote on co-plan sequence social scripts, and just all of the ways in which if we just focus on teaching kids how to use a device, but we don't focus on giving them the opportunity to be part of conversation, then they actually may not learn the skills to use the device because they never got to have that experience of conversation. Carolyn, do you want to add anything about that book?
No, I think well, just that it's a book called Social Scripts that Linda and I did, and we'll be talking more about social scripts in an upcoming webinar in, I think, maybe in February. So you'll get to hear a lot about that.
Awesome. So really when it comes down to it, our goal is storytelling, and it's supporting our folks with Angelman to be effective storytelling. The reason why is because communication really only matters if you can be a storyteller. Otherwise, your communication might be very restricted to just things like requests, just things like responding, but not actually feeling like you're really part of that flow of communication that's all around you, that you can actually fully participate. We want to create space for our kids to focus on how they're going to embellish on their story, how they're going to comment on their story, what they're going to add to their stories, the way that Carolyn talked about the girl stamping her feet, rather than how do I find the individual details. Because if we go back to something like Lily Grace's Surf Day book, and we think about how much it would take for Lily Grace to be able to tell someone that she's gone surfing using her pod book, the amount of energy that would go into just telling someone that she went surfing is really the amount of energy that we'd rather put all the details of the surfing out so she doesn't have to focus on that, and she can talk about things like how it was cool or how it was wet or how she was tired or how it was fun, but adding something to it. So there. And so really what we're thinking about is how these written stories can be a tool that our folks can use to initiate storytelling, because we know that folks with Angelman very often are great initiators. They love to approach people, they love to make eye contact, they love to have a social interaction, but they often don't have something to go with from there. They can approach people, they can get the eye contact, they can start something, but they don't really have the skills to have a follow-through. Even some of our most skilled AAC users are folks who've been using the communication system for a while. They then have to stop the interaction in order to now focus on their device and start putting things together for what they're going to say, and sometimes they lose the other person's attention, especially if the other person really hasn't learned how to be a good communication partner in response. So what we're trying to do with these stories is give something that helps our folks be not only good at initiating storytelling, but be able to more easily follow through.
Erin, this is Maureen.
Oh, hey, Maureen.
This is a perfect place for this comment, I think, which is I find that these types of written stories really help the partner to feel more comfortable, especially if that partner is less familiar with the student or the communication system. A written story is something that they can relate to, and like you talked about, that joint attention. Now I know, sort of what we're talking about, and people tend to feel more comfortable about having that interaction as opposed to, I'm not sure what my role is, or I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do or say here, and that can kind of collapse that interaction. So I find having that, just something to share, it really helps that partner to feel more comfortable to be in that interaction.
Absolutely.
Yep. And I found with Maggie, like even in her 6th grade class, the stories we had written for her in 2nd grade were still something the girls liked to get out. They were read and reread and reread. And so she had stories from 2nd grade about how much she loved Justin Bieber. And in 6th grade, they thought it was hysterical to get those stories out and laugh at, can you believe that we ever loved Justin Bieber, right? I mean, surely everyone knows. It was hilarious. It was so funny to see how rich it was and what a strong connection the girls made between themselves and Maggie, just based on all these stories that she had. So, and at that point, I didn't know anything about social scripts or personal experience stories or Remnant books. I just knew that providing stories for Maggie provided the interaction. So, and we know that storytelling is just really essential for anyone who's learning to use a communication system. If they're brand new, if we've just gotten the iPad, we've just gotten the app, we're just starting this series and trying to figure it out, then what we can do is create these stories to support our kids, and we can model how to use them. When someone says, hey, Joey, tell me, how was your Christmas? We can grab their experience, their personal experience story that we wrote for them or with them, and we can model, hey, Joey, let's take a look through your book and show her, right? We can model what it's for, and they can observe us doing it. If our folks are more experienced, then they still need that model of how does a conversation work. It's what Carolyn refers to as the anatomy of a conversation. And how do we take turns, and how do you create space for another person to say something and then you add something to it? How do you maintain kind of control of the topic, because you're talking about your Christmas experience while also inviting someone else to share their experiences. So kind of regardless of whether you're one of the newest AAC users or you're one of the most experienced, there's so many reasons for us to create these personal experience books to support and use and model and just keep going. I helped a family, a young woman who goes out to the bars on the weekend, helped her create some of these personal experience stories so she could more easily have conversation about the things that she does on the weekend. It's just as easy to do it for someone who goes clubbing as it is for someone who is a 7-year-old who loves Justin Bieber. So here's just kind of a little sample script. This is a PowerPoint, and I will post it as an attachment. But you can see here we've got 4 choices of what we might call this book. My winter holidays, or if you're down under, my summer holidays, my Christmas holidays, or something different. We're going to offer you that option as well. And all I would do with this is select one of these, delete the rest, and add a photo, because photos speak 1,000 words. And this is all we're talking about, just a few sentences. So if you went somewhere, where did you go? I went to the mall to see Santa. I went to my grandma's house in Philadelphia. I went to the beach. I went to wherever you went over this break or whatever the time period. You can finish that sentence or not. Maybe it's not relevant to your story. What is something you did? What's a verb you used? And I like to go through whatever the person's communication system is and see what they've already got in there. So what words do they have? So if they went surfing, do they have the word surfing? And if not, can we add it? Can we make sure we add it? If they went swimming, if they sat on Santa's lap, whatever they did, what these kind of stories will help us do is look in their system and make sure they actually have the words for what they want to talk about. What's something they saw? What's something they saw that they laughed at, that they giggled about, that they clearly wanted to touch because they'd seen it? Finish that sentence. I saw. What's something I saw that you thought that was clearly particularly remarkable to your person? What's something that they clearly liked, right? And if your person is just more experienced with the communication system and you can say to them, hey, what did you like? Maybe they can point at it, maybe they can use their system and they can finish the sentence themselves. Great. If they're not at that point yet, if they're still more emergent, then what did you observe that tells you what it is they liked? And we can model how I think you liked when the wave hit you in the face, or I think you really liked the Lego set, or etc. Because it's so close to Christmas and so many folks have just celebrated a holiday related to gift giving. What's something you got or what's something you gave, right? You can finish that sentence. And now we can just wrap it up with it was. What's a describing word that you would describe for, Maggie right now would probably describe her Christmas holidays as rather boring because we've sort of been stuck in the house for the last week. But we can observe our person, we can suggest words, but this is really all we're talking about is just finishing some very simple sentences to be able to take back and share with others. So my general rule is keep it to 5 sentences. I think I just showed you 6, figuring that some of those weren't going to be relevant, but just a 5-sentence summary. And if you think of that Lily Grace surfing book, it's just a great example. So where did she go? What are 2 or 3 things that she did? What she got was the physical object that she was the most excited about afterwards, which was the trophy. And what was it? It was actually pretty exhausting.
And I think that this is a nice opportunity to allow kids to share things that other students might have shared over the same holiday, so that we're building in those shared interests, that opportunity for having a conversation, and then also sort of things that are unique to them, because those are things that are going to really spark conversations. So maybe they're going to say they saw The Good Dinosaur, which was, a big holiday movie, or maybe older kids are talking about seeing Star Wars. That's going to generate a lot of conversation, whether kids saw it or they didn't get to see it. And then if they got something that's kind of different and unique, that's going to be a great conversation starter too. So just thinking about the shared ideas and the uniqueness as 2 very different ways to get those conversations going.
And think about how helpful it is for the classroom team when the student comes in, so maybe they're younger and they still have circle time activities, and the kids all go around and they all talk about something they did or something they got, and the educational assistant has just had a minute or 2 to read the communication page and find out what happened over Christmas break, and now it's already our student's turn, and we all quickly say, okay, Sadie, what did you get? And if she's not able to kind of quickly come up with something, then very often, we step in and we just say, we look for any clue. I find school teams looking for any clue to support the student's communication. If that student comes in with a little 5-page book about the holidays, that school team, that educational assistant, that teacher, that speech therapist, they have so much more to go with. They can say, oh, I know where Sadie went, she went to Toronto, she got this, right? Because they just have that extra clue to sort of scaffold our kids to another level. So I try to keep it to a 5-sentence summary because anyone who knows me knows that I can't keep anything to 5 sentences. But I found that kind of a 5-page book is the most likely to be read and used. And my usual 30-page books that I sent in when Maggie was much younger were just a little too daunting and a little too much for the school teams to use as much. So learn from my experience. Remnant books are just when we go one extra step. So we've already paired some words with some photos, but now we're looking for more tangible clues. And we know from the research on Remnant books that it supports anyone with a cognitive disability to be able to kind of retrieve memories about something they did, whether it's Alzheimer's or whether it's Angelman. Having a real life object that is associated with what you do, with what you did, really retrieves all those memories, helps you bring them all to the forefront of your mind so you can share them with other people. And here are some examples. I think these are from Riley, Keisha's daughter Riley, and they're just a fabulous example. What we're looking for with Remnant books is what are the tangible things that the student, that our person, associates with the event. So for example, going on a walk with Maggie, if she picks up a leaf, or over the holidays she really likes certain kinds of wrapping paper, really silvery, sturdy wrapping paper, and she's been carrying it around, I know that's what held her attention, and that's what's going to go in her Remnant book. And for another student, it might be the bow. For another student, it might be a photo of the toy. For another student, it might be the packaging that the toy was wrapped in. But there's all these different things, and we're just looking to our folks for clues about what is it that stands out to them. So here you can see the movie tickets, as well as images of the movie that the student went to see. Here we've got a present that Riley got in the mail, an American Girl doll. We've got the shipping label that shows that it was Grandma who sent it to her. We've got images of our trip to Phoenix and of the hotel, so it looks like a coaster from the room. We've got the cruise tickets and photos and a cutout, like it looks like from a magazine or from a flyer about what Riley did for Christmas. They planted flowers for Mother's Day, so we've got the actual little plastic tag that came in the flowers. We went flying in Daddy's airplane, and so we have photos. We went to the dentist, and I've always thought this is probably just the most classic Remnant book page, because what is it when you think about the dentist that's actually one of your strongest memories, one of the most sensory kind of qualities of memory, going to a dentist? Well, it's the glove. It's the taste of the glove and that feeling of having someone's gloved finger in your mouth. And that's what Riley's got as her remnant to help her talk about having gone to the dentist. And if you look at these, all we're looking at here is construction paper with a little bit of typed text, but it could also be handwritten with a Sharpie. You can write it on white paper and glue it down. I mean, these pages have now been slid into page protectors. You know, we're not trying to do Martha Stewart-worthy scrapbooking here. These are conversation supports, and this might be something we don't talk about again. It may no longer be interesting that I went to the dentist 3 months from now, so it's okay if it's kind of temporary. It doesn't have to be perfect. Here's Sadie and what her mom does. She's done a lot of predictable chart writing. She's done a lot of Remnant books. She actually does do a whole bunch of stuff that really is Martha Stewart worthy, just because that's how good she is. But you don't have to, right? So Sadie loves to select photos and help talk about the kinds of things she does. She puts her own drawings in. She puts her own photos in. She cuts things out of magazines. And what her mom did here was she had a book of page protectors, which is how she makes her Remnant books. But she actually took a screenshot of the home page of her communication system, so that if there was a really high frequency word that Sadie wanted to use that was related to one of her stories, she didn't have to now stop with her book and use her talker, but she actually had her most high frequency words right there. And what Sadie's mom did here was actually taped it as a flap, so it's a fold down flap. So at the back of the book, she can fold the copy of the home page right back into the book, or she can fold it out so her words are right there. Maureen and Carolyn, is there anything you want to add to these?
I just think that that is such a brilliant thing. I would absolutely encourage. After I saw that idea of what Sadie was doing, I shared that with a couple of other families I was working with, and they did the same thing, and it's just been really powerful.
Right.
I think that is something we should totally share. In fact, it just reminded me that I'm going to put that on my Communication All Day Pinterest page.
And notice here that, I mean, Karen hand wrote a sentence about what they did with the horses on the page. I mean, this is not really complicated, fancy stuff here, right? It's just a scribbled note, so it's just enough text that people who didn't do the activity with our child or with our person can look at the page and see what they did. But I hope that gives you just some ideas of what other parents are doing. What you want to do in the beginning is just select a tool. It's interesting because many of us who really like electronics tend to go to computers. We tend to go to iPads to do stuff like this. But I personally find that it's actually far more social to have stuff in hard copy. It doesn't seem to matter if it's handmade on construction paper versus if it was made on a computer and then printed. Whatever actually gets it done is the most valuable. So if you make this beautiful page, you make this beautiful book on your iPad, but then you can't figure out how to get it to a printer and then you don't have the time to get it laminated, that what might have actually been more effective is construction paper, a Sharpie, and a few photos. Maggie, for her Christmas gift this year, she actually got a little printer called a Selfie. It's just a little photo printer. That's all it does, and it prints photo, like drugstore photo quality printer photos, so that we can really quickly and easily print her pictures and not actually have to have all the stars aligned so that I can actually get to my office and transfer them to my computer and then print them out perfectly and all that kind of stuff, because to me that's the barrier that makes it not happen. So just think about your tool. And I find that if stuff is paper, if it's hard copy, it's much more social. Whereas, let's say your child uses an iPad to communicate and they also have an app like Pictello where they can tell stories. If they have to leave their communication system to go tell their story, then we've just kind of created an extra barrier for them to be able to come up with stories. For some of our kids, once they really own their iPad, once it's really theirs, it becomes really difficult for them to hand it over to share other stories. Where if it's a paper copy, many of our kids have dozens of these paper laminated books or remnant books made on cardstock and just slid into page protectors, whatever they've got. So think about that. There's actually a huge advantage to having hard copy rather than digital. Because my handwriting's so bad, I tend to do mine on the computer and then print it out, but whatever works. When we go to write these stories with our person, we really want to be inviting them to participate. And that means that for many of our folks, they're very emergent. Their communication system is very new. If we sit down and say, okay, tell me what you most liked about Christmas, and we wait, we might not be able to get that response. They might first need to see lots of examples, lots of models of how we can talk about Christmas using their talker. It might even be a few Christmases from now before they can actually finish that sentence about what they liked about Christmas, and that's okay. We're going to invite them to participate, but it's not work. We're going to model. And if you go back and watch that webinar number 11 that talked about shared writing, you'll get a little bit more explanation of this. But know that based on where our folks are in their communication journey, they might be down at the bottom of this pyramid in terms of just becoming aware of what communication systems are, just becoming aware that they can be used. They might just be becoming aware of books and the idea that we can use a book to share our stories. They might just be at that stage where they're mostly just exploring, or where they'll observe us, but they're not actually initiating it on their own yet. They might start imitating us, but that's kind of the earlier stages. Then we start to see more participation. But participation only comes when kids can predict what it is they're supposed to do. They know what that tool is. They know that that's how we use a written story to tell a story, to have a conversation. They've seen it enough times that they can predict what's happening, and now they can start participating. They've had that repetition, and that repetition has been meaningful. It's been interesting because it's been about them. And it may be a while before they've got the mastery and the independence to be able to do this on their own, and that's okay. So just be thinking about that. Wherever your person's at, right now they might be at a stage where you're going to do the writing for them, but you're just going to constantly keep giving them that invitation to be part of it with you. And the instructional framework that we laid out in that October webinar was just to know that if our person is at that stage of awareness, where they're just learning what all this is, but they're not actually learning how to use it yet, they're just at that observation stage, then what we're going to focus on is what am I as the teacher or as the parent going to do? Once they start participating, once I can say to them, I think you really liked that Lego kit, and our person runs and grabs the Lego kit or runs and grabs something else, now we're getting some real participation. Now we're going to keep modeling for them how they could use their system to do it as well, and we're going to go from there. But just know it's okay if it feels to you, when you think about writing a book with your child, and if it feels like, how would I ever get him to be part of that? Then just know you might very well be at that stage where it's all about what you are going to do that he can watch. And you're going to keep inviting him to participate with the end goal of that kind of independence down the road. So we're going to model our writing. We're going to take their communication system to model how I'm going to say, I like, oh, what did I most like about Christmas? Or I went, let's look in your places, oh, it's not there. How did we not put this in there? Or we went to places, to grandma's house, right? But we're going to provide that model of how they can use the system to be able to tell their story. They're going to see from our example why this matters. They're going to see from us when we write this book, and then when we keep using it over and over, why that book really matters. And you'll see the stage where the kids really begin to own this, where they start to really own their Remnant books. The way Sadie, for example, really owns her Remnant books and will initiate when a new person comes running and grabbing one of her Remnant books so she can start telling a story. We're going to model it so that we can have the practice using the tool, and every time we read this book with them, every time we write with them, we're really providing lots of repetition with variation. So we're going to choose a message, and Carolyn's going to pick it up now in just a second, but we're going to start with the student's communication system. We're going to set our topic. We're going to model what it is we want to say. What's the story that we want to tell, and who do we want to tell it to? So around the holidays, we know there's going to be a lot of questions about where you went, what you got, what you gave, what you did over the breaks. So we can predict that, who are the people that we're going to want to talk to, and what it is we're going to want to be able to talk about. And now the final stage is really being able to model and create those opportunities. So for example, when we're dropping our child off at school and the educational assistant says, so what did you do? That's our chance. Oh my gosh, Sadie, we made a book about this. Quick, let's show, Mrs. Smith the book that we made, so you can show her what you did, and provide even that model to the educational assistant so that she knows when the school receptionist greets her student as they walk in the door of the school and says, oh, Sadie, it's so good to see you again. What did you do over Christmas? That you can immediately, that the educational assistant or the teacher can kind of immediately pick that up and realize what a great tool they've got in this story. So we're just looking for those opportunities. We're looking for those opportunities to be able to say, hey, we can tell Grandma what we did last week. Let's go find your book. Or we can tell to the classmates and peers when it's circle time, Sadie brought in a whole book about what she did over the break. Anybody who wants to see it, we'll do it after circle time. Stuff like that. So Carolyn, I'm going to hand it over to you because you were going to talk about topic setting.
But just go ahead and advance the slides, Erin, so it'll go,
go back.
Okay.
There you go.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about topic setting, because really that's what this whole Remnant book is allowing kids, and stories are allowing kids to do, is they are in control of setting the topic instead of other people, as Maureen was saying, might be feeling kind of awkward because they don't really know what topics are going to work for this student because they don't know them real well. And so now the student has the opportunity of being in control. So we'll advance to the next slide, and I'll tell you a little bit about research. This is just going to be hopefully very painless. That For face-to-face, in other words, communication just on the go, our students have historically had kind of a respondent role, and they have not had equal turn-taking patterns. That means their partners are doing almost all the talking, and our kids don't get as many opportunities to be the one in control. And if you think about it, if you have a book, and we've modeled some ways to use this book to tell the story of some of the things that happened over your holiday, then it's so much easier to initiate just by taking that book and handing it to a person. And now we can look at some equalizing of the turn-taking patterns, because as you look at each page, we can work with students across time to start making comments and start adding, because there's that pressure of setting that topic is off, that pressure of finding those difficult words that we don't really use that much is not there. So now we can get more equal turn-taking patterns. We know that peer-to-peer interactions have been rare and brief historically. I think they're getting a little better as more and more students are in situations where they're included with their peers, but lots and lots and lots of students I work with don't have those opportunities so often. These are the kinds of things that can be really great ways to jump in and connect. So just like we could laugh about how Maggie used to like Justin Bieber, and now what about One Direction? Are they sort of on the outs too, or can we still talk about them? That whole shared knowledge is just really powerful in developing peer-to-peer interactions. So on the next slide, we'll talk more about specific research in why it's so hard to start and maintain a topic. So this is from Delva Culp in 1988. So this is really old research, but I think a lot of these factors are still true. So one was vocabulary constraints. You've heard Maureen do that wonderful presentation on Does Your App Measure Up? You've heard us talk about a robust, rich vocabulary. So a lot of you are using pod communication books with your students that have lots of rich language and lots of strategies to enhance the speed of communication and help students understand the pragmatic intent. We have lots of you out there using a Proloquo to go with core language, with a core page that has maybe 60 or more symbols on it, so you have lots of opportunities to quickly get to many communication words. We have lots of kids using Words for Life, etc. So just all kinds of opportunities to reduce that vocabulary constraint. So I feel like that's not as much of an issue, but it's still an issue. We're still not going to have every word you need to have. I think number two, the rate and timing of message delivery is absolutely huge. That is the big stopper, that the idea that Lily Grace would be able to say, hey guys, I went surfing, I was at a camp, it was really fun. You know, that is a really hard thing to do and quickly to get that message, that topic set. It's a huge physical effort, but I think it's also a huge cognitive effort for students. Some students have limited environmental experiences, which has been making it hard to set and maintain topics. I think that's the one that's the least of an issue for the students that I know with Angelman syndrome. Definitely have had great, very rich environmental experiences. But partner behaviors are a big deal. And now I'm not talking about the parents. I'm talking about partners who are just maybe acquaintances or people who are paid to interact, or particularly unfamiliar partners who just really don't have a clue how to support students in using their communication systems. So if we have these topic remnant books or a story that tells about what happened over Christmas, then they have so much more of a chance. So as you'll see on the next slide, we will talk about topic setter notebooks. And so a topic setter notebook is the Remnant notebooks that you saw such rich examples of from Riley and from Sadie. And so just remembering that what we want to save, on the next slide I gave just examples of a few of the kinds of things that I've seen students save. Certainly ticket stubs. You saw that Riley had a ticket stub to a movie that she'd gone to. Postcards can be really fun if you've been somewhere or a family member's been somewhere. Obviously photos, you saw lots of examples of photos. Napkins. And so, I'm showing the Burger King napkin. Well, they don't really have a Burger King logo anymore, but we can just draw a little logo and indicate that it came from there. A bulletin, you went to watch your big brother at a holiday concert. That makes a great thing to tell about. I had a wonderful story shown about a kid had their hair cut, and they were really not happy with the outcome of that haircut. And so that lock of hair in that Remnant book was really, really powerful to tell the story about the bad haircut. This idea comes from David Buchelman, and interestingly, this was started out for people who have aphasia, so they've had a significant stroke and they're having trouble getting things started, and so they had Remnant books and photo albums, and that would set the topic, so then their speech would be more easily understood. So it's a really powerful strategy, I think, for so many people. And if you'll advance to the next slide, then I'm just going to show you an example of something that I've done that worked out really, really well for students to have a longer conversation and to teach them how to kind of be interactive at school when you're with unfamiliar partners. So this is not something you need to do for home, but this just takes your little Remnant book and you've added a Post-it note. So if you'll go to the next page, I will give you some more information. So you saw that there was a picture, maybe it was a half of a, in this particular example of a little girl, it was half of a ticket stub and it was a dead balloon. And then the question was, I went. And the question was the zoo, the movies, the circus. Well, that's an easy one because we knew the circus was in town. But what I want to do is tell you the story of what happened, what usually happened when Mama just sent in a note. Mom would send in a note and it would say, Rachel went to the circus. She had a wonderful time. She went with Nana and Grandy, and her favorite act was the tightrope walker. Her Grandy spilled his popcorn on the man in front, and the man was so mad. Okay, so this is just this whole long story. And what would usually happen is that the teacher would say to Rachel, Rachel, you went to the circus, and Rachel would nod her head and smile, and she'd say, oh, and you went with Nana and Grandy, and Rachel would nod her head and smile. Oh, and your favorite act was the tightrope walker. And if Rachel shook her head, it didn't matter because this is what Mama wrote and this is the truth, right? So it's not Rachel's story to tell. It's just something we're reading and we're really bypassing Rachel. And all she is just someone to sort of confirm, yep, nope, nope. So instead, we've set it up with multiple choice. Guess where I went? Well, they figured out the circus, but then guess who I went with? It was so interesting to hear that people used a real conversational voice instead of, who did you go with? When we know the answer, we do it in that different kind of teacher voice. But when we really don't know the answer, we're like, who'd you go with? Okay, Mommy, Nana and Grandy, or Aunt Cindy? Okay, was it Mommy? And if she said yes, we could turn it over, and the answer is Nana and Grandy. We could say, oh, you are so pulling my leg. You did not go with Mommy. You went with Nana and Grandy. So across time, kids learn not to just accept the first answer. So it's just a great way to teach that kind of opportunity. And I remember that when we did this using the Post-its, and she answered tightrope walker, and the answer she answered the clowns was her favorite, and on the Post-it note it said tightrope walker because that's what she told her mom the night before. But now we had this great opportunity for writing a note back to mom saying, guess what, Mom? I changed my mind. I like the clowns best, not the tightrope walker. So just really, really fun and powerful. And so on the next slide, we can see that just something else fun to do is just make your holiday cards into a book. So we've just taken the holiday card that Aunt Carrie sent, and we, one page, you can see these are facing pages in a book. It says Happy Holidays, and then you read and it says Aunt Carrie. And then the next page is what you got from Nana and Grandy. So just kind of fun way to take if your kids like the holiday cards, then you can just make it into a holiday card book. And they can be looking at the names of their favorite family people because that's something that our students really, really care about is people. And so making that connection with people, and obviously you could also add a picture of Aunt Carrie. So just thinking of how you can take those holiday cards that the student was loving, and just turn those into a book that you can read over and over. We're talking about a 3-minute activity. All you need is packing tape and a Sharpie. This is an idea from Dr. Gretchen Hanser. And then the next page, we love, 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 love alphabet books. So why not recycle our holiday cards? Because then you're not having to deal with, oh, expletive deleted, my stupid printer's out of ink again. You're not using up a lot of ink. It's not a hassle. You're not searching for things on the internet. You're just pulling through your cards and finding cards that would represent different letters of the alphabet. And then you just take a white paper and you can use a Sharpie. S is for snow and snowman. And so just having a lot of fun with an alphabet book. And you might even want to add a big letter S on a piece of white paper too. But I just showed you, this is cable ties, holiday card, construction paper. You know, this is, again, not rocket science. It's not really difficult, and you probably are going to want to put that in, either laminate or put it into a page protector before you use the cable ties. Okay?
All right. So in terms of next steps, I think that some of the things you might think about are just spend a little bit of time observing what questions people are already asking your person right now, right? What are the conversations that are happening around him or around her that really aren't directly including her? And let's see if we can prioritize kind of what are those topics for writing. So I've just predicted that whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere, you've probably just had a break. And therefore people will be asking questions about what you did over that break, so that might be one. But just spend some time, because if the same questions are being asked repeatedly, then those are really good topics to come up with for writing. We'll want to spend some time selecting a tool for writing. So maybe it's paper and photos. Maybe it's lamination versus page protectors. Maybe you're going to do it on an iPad or a computer. Choose your tool and go from there. Our next step is to actually model the writing, and ideally using our person's communication system to do it, so that we're providing that really direct model of how not only can I write using a Sharpie and write things down, but I'm actually writing in a way that my person can write using the same tool. And we're going to invite our people to participate as much as possible in this, whether they're extremely emergent and they're just observing right now. That's fine. That's just as important as if they are really active participants. But as long as we keep extending that invitation. And I loved the examples that Carolyn just showed us and how to kind of structure that as a question opportunity, so that our kids are really active. They're not just bringing their book along for everybody to read the book, but they're actually confirming or denying what we have in there. So I hope you guys got some really good ideas, and we would love to hear from you in the Facebook group if you want more ideas, if you ran into problems, or if you found something that was really effective. Please share that with us in the Facebook group. We really love all the stories that are going around right now. And we can now take questions. While we're waiting for questions, I'm just going to remind everyone that this ASF Communication Training Series is made available by the Angelman Syndrome Foundation through a generous grant from the Foster Family Charitable Foundation in California. And now we
Erin,
go back to questions.
I just wanted to make a comment. Working in the schools as I do, that I don't think you can appreciate how beneficial some of these stories are in helping to broaden people's idea about what this person's life is outside of school or outside of the environment where they know them. So I know I used to make books like this for my nephew, who underwent a lot of medical procedures and was in the hospital. And invariably, if I am there to see the response of the partners when they're reading the books, they're surprised. They're always surprised, like, oh my gosh, you do this, you do that, or you know, they're just, I find that it really expands their view of who that person is, and invariably that expands their expectations of that person. So it is very powerful on a lot of fronts. In, again, whether it's a medical environment or a school environment or a work environment, I think they're very powerful tools in addition to the for the individual in the writing for communication. So I just wanted to add that.
Oh, and I totally agree. And it's interesting because the more that we've worked on this within our Angelman community, the more that I've worked on this as Maggie's mom. We went to a holiday event earlier in December where there were just a very large number of people with disabilities who couldn't speak. And it was really frustrating for me as a communication partner, as someone who actually has some experience in all this, because it was all adults, none of them had any tool to be able to share with anyone who didn't know them well. So they were there being supported by staff who knew them well, who could answer somebody else's questions and who could offer ideas. But for me, as someone who didn't know them and wanted to get to know them, there were no tools. There were no tools to support it, and the default was to actually let a staff person answer for them instead. And even just a really simple book about who they are, what they do, where they live, it just would have been priceless. So Amy, do we have any questions?
We do not have any questions. I thought for sure we would have a couple come in, but we don't. So that's okay. You know, if there are questions, you can